The story of Nero begins not in fire, but in whispers. Whispers that drifted through marble corridors and candlelit villas of Rome. Carried by servants, senators, and slaves. It was the 1st century after Christ, and Rome stood as the largest city the ancient world had ever known. A living labyrinth of stone and flesh, of triumph and terror. At its heart ruled the Julio-Claudian dynasty, heirs of Julius Caesar and Augustus. Men who clothed themselves in divine ancestry and wielded power as though it had been handed down from the gods. Out of this lineage emerged a boy, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, who the world would come to know by another name, Nero. Nero was not destined by birth to be emperor. His rise was engineered by the ambition of his mother, Agrippina the Younger, a woman as cunning as she was relentless. She maneuvered through a court riddled with intrigue, married the aging Emperor Claudius, and ensured her son was adopted as heir. To the Roman people, the adoption seemed like the natural continuation of dynastic bloodlines. To Agrippina, it was the culmination of years of calculation. The boy who once seemed peripheral to power was now thrust onto the stage of empire.
He's collapsing.
When Claudius died, under circumstances that some whispered were hastened by poison, Nero became emperor at just 17. Rome, weary of past turmoil, greeted the youth with optimism. His first speeches promised renewal, and his early acts were gentle, pardons to political enemies, a reduction in taxes, and public games that delighted the masses. For a fleeting moment, the people of Rome believed they had found a ruler of mercy and culture. Statues were raised, coins stamped with his youthful profile, and poets sang verses praising a new golden age. But beneath the veneer of youthful promise simmered tension. Agrippina, who had orchestrated her son's rise, sought to rule through him. She appeared beside him in official audiences, even sharing his throne in public ceremonies, an act that scandalized Rome's patriarchal society. Senators whispered of a woman who held the empire in her grip, and Nero himself began to feel the tightening leash of maternal dominance. Their relationship, once the foundation of his power, curdled into suspicion and resentment. Rome was stunned when Agrippina, the very architect of Nero's rule, was found dead, stabbed and struck down in what many believed was her son's own command. The murder of a mother by her emperor son seared itself into the Roman imagination, a chilling omen of what was to come. With his mother gone, Nero stepped more boldly into his role, yet he did not walk the path of statesmen and generals before him. Nero craved not the burdens of governance but the intoxication of performance. He sang, he played the lyre, he wrote poetry, and he believed himself destined for artistic greatness. To him, ruling Rome was merely another stage, and the empire his captive audience. Senators were forced to sit through his recitals, citizens compelled to applaud his verses. Those who showed disinterest risked their lives. Art, which should have been the expression of freedom, became in Nero's hands a weapon of tyranny, binding Rome in applause that was no less coerced than chains of iron. But art alone did not satisfy his darker instincts. Political rivals were purged under charges of treason, whispers of dissent silenced with the sword. The blood of senators and generals stained the marble floors of the Palatine, their deaths justified under the guise of protecting the empire. Fear seeped into the daily life of Rome, as men and women learned that survival depended not on truth, but on the emperor's mood. To live in Nero's Rome was to walk upon a stage where every gesture, every word, could be fatal if not properly scripted. Then, in the summer of the year 64, Rome was transformed into a vision of apocalypse. Flames erupted in the crowded districts near the Circus Maximus, where wooden shops and homes pressed tightly together. The fire spread with merciless speed, leaping from roof to roof, driven by the hot winds of July. For 9 days, Rome burned, temples crumbled into ash, marketplaces collapsed, and entire neighborhoods vanished in a sea of flame. Families fled into open fields, clutching children and relics, as smoke blotted out the sky. When the fire finally died, the city was scarred beyond recognition. Thousands were homeless, countless dead. Amid the ruins, a single rumor spread like embers on the wind, that Nero had played his lyre while Rome burned, as though the inferno itself was but the backdrop for his performance. Historians debate the truth of this tale, yet the image endured, an emperor unmoved by suffering, intoxicated by the spectacle of destruction. Whether or not he set the fire, Nero would forever be bound to its flames. In the ashes of the Great Fire, Nero faced a city that demanded answers. The people wanted to know why their homes had vanished, why their temples lay in ruins, why the very heart of Rome had been reduced to rubble. Accusations crept toward the emperor himself, accusations that he had ordered the blaze to clear land for his extravagant ambitions. The whispers struck at the very core of his image. If Rome believed he had destroyed his own capital, his rule would crumble. Nero needed an enemy, and he found one. The Christians of Rome were a small sect, strange to the Roman eye, worshipping a crucified God and refusing to honor the traditional deities of the empire. Their secrecy bred suspicion, their rituals misunderstood, their faith seen as defiance. Nero cast the blame upon them. To divert fury from himself, he declared the Christians guilty of the fire and unleashed punishments that turned cruelty into spectacle. In gardens lit by torches, men and women burned alive, torches not of wax, but of human flesh. Others were torn by beasts in the arenas. Their deaths cheered as though Rome could cleanse itself through blood. Terror, once contained within the marble halls of politics, now spilled into the streets, and the Christians became the scapegoats upon whom the empire's rage was satisfied. In their suffering, however, a new narrative was born, one of martyrdom, one that would echo far beyond Nero's reign. While Rome reeled, Nero poured treasure into rebuilding. From the charred remains of the city rose the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. A palace so vast and decadent it seemed less a home than a declaration of divinity. Its halls glittered with gold leaf, its ceilings painted with stars, its walls adorned with jewels and fountains. At its center stood a colossal statue of Nero himself, crafted in the image of a god. To the Roman people, still displaced and destitute, this spectacle was not comfort but insult. Where they saw ruins and loss, Nero saw only opportunity for grandeur. The emperor who promised renewal offered instead the weight of his own vanity. Discontent spread like an unquenchable fire. In distant provinces, governors and generals began to murmur of revolt. In Gaul, the legions rallied behind Vindex. In Spain, the powerful general Galba declared himself emperor. Even among Nero's Praetorian Guard, loyalty weakened. Senators who once bowed in submission now conspired in whispers. The empire, stretched across continents, was beginning to fracture beneath the strain of one man's rule. Nero, faced with rebellion, did not turn to strategy or arms. Instead, he fled deeper into fantasy. He performed in Greece, declaring his victories in competitions where no one dared to defeat him. He sang, he acted, he basked in applause that rang hollow against the gathering storm. Rome, meanwhile, teetered on the edge of civil war, when news reached the city that the Senate had declared him a public enemy. Nero's world collapsed. His guards deserted him. His advisors fled. The man who once commanded the greatest empire on earth was now alone, hunted by his own people. In desperation, Nero sought refuge in the villa of a freedman. There, trembling, he asked for the courage to end his life. His hands shook, his voice cracked. Assisted by a loyal companion, Nero drove a dagger into his throat. He was 30 years old. As the life drained from him, he is said to have uttered words that would haunt history. Qualis artifex pareo, when an artist dies in me. With his death, the Julio-Claudian dynasty ended. The empire was thrown into chaos. A year of 4 emperors tearing Rome apart until order was restored by Vespasian. Yet Nero did not vanish with his body. Legends arose of his return. Whispers that he had not died but would come again to reclaim his throne. For centuries, stories of Nero Redivivus haunted the Roman imagination. A ghost emperor lingering in rumor and prophecy. And so, across time, Nero's image endured. To Christians, he was remembered as a persecutor, a beast foreshadowed in apocalyptic visions. To Romans, he was the tyrant who destroyed his own city and squandered an empire's faith. To history, he became a symbol of how art and cruelty, spectacle and blood, could intertwine in the figure of one man. His reign stands as a mirror, reflecting the dangerous intoxication of power when unrestrained by morality, when leadership dissolves into theater, Centuries later, his name remains a byword for decadence and destruction. But the question lingers, unresolved, whispered through the corridors of time. Was Nero truly a monster unique to his age? Or was he simply the most vivid expression of the darkness that lies waiting in all rulers who mistake their empire for a stage? Nero's death did not close his story. In truth, it only magnified it. For while emperors rise and fall, few leave behind an image so enduring, so intoxicating, that it transcends centuries. Nero became less a man than a myth, an eternal symbol of what happens when power loses all restraint. When spectacle becomes the substitute for governance. When cruelty is wrapped in the shimmering veil of art. His name, spoken in hushed tones, outlived marble palaces and crumbling arenas, surviving not just in history books but in the collective imagination of civilizations that came long after Rome's dust had settled. In the years following his suicide, a strange phenomenon rippled through the empire. Impostors arose claiming to be Nero returned from the dead. Some appeared in the eastern provinces, gathering followers who believed the emperor had escaped and would one day reclaim the throne. This myth, known as the Nero redivivus legend, persisted for generations, a phantom echo of fear and fascination. Even as new emperors ruled, the specter of Nero haunted them, a reminder that the shadow of tyranny does not vanish with the tyrant's body. The idea of Nero lingered, as though Rome itself could not escape the memory of its burning. For Christians, Nero's legacy burned deeper still. His persecution etched itself into the consciousness of an emerging faith. In the apocalyptic visions recorded in Revelation, some early believers saw Nero as the beast, the embodiment of ultimate evil. His name encoded in the mysterious number 666. Whether or not he was truly the figure intended, the association became embedded in Christian tradition. Nero is Antichrist, the archetype of persecutor, a ruler who wielded state power to annihilate the faithful. Thus he was transformed from mere emperor into a theological symbol of all that opposes the divine. His cruelty gave martyrdom its fire. His oppression carved the foundation stones of a religion that would one day outlast his empire. Yet even beyond theology, Nero came to symbolize the seduction of decadence. To Renaissance thinkers, he was the warning of what happens when rulers abandon duty for pleasure. To modern minds, he is invoked whenever leaders are accused of apathy in the face of disaster. Whenever spectacle overshadows responsibility, the image of Nero, fiddling while Rome burns, survives as a cultural shorthand. A phrase that condemns negligence and self-indulgence in times of crisis. It does not matter that historians argue whether he actually played his instrument during the fire. The story has become larger than the fact, more powerful than the truth itself. Archaeologists who step into the remains of the Domus Aurea describe the eerie grandeur of a man who imagined himself a living god. Frescoes of mythological scenes line the ceilings. Golden light once reflected off mosaics that dazzled visitors. It was art in service of vanity. Beauty twisted into monument. Walking through those ruins, one cannot help but feel the duality of Nero's reign, the intoxicating allure of creativity and the chilling abyss of cruelty. He saw himself as an artist above all else, yet his masterpiece was destruction, his legacy painted in fire and blood. But perhaps Nero's greatest lesson is not confined to the past. In a world still governed by spectacle, where politics is broadcast like theater, where leaders sculpt their images through media, where truth bends beneath the weight of performance, Nero's story feels unsettlingly modern. He reminds us that power, when performed rather than practiced, can consume not only those who hold it but the world around them. His Rome was set aflame by rumor, by arrogance, by the unchecked theater of ego. Our world, too, trembles under its own fires, whether political, environmental, or spiritual, and the question becomes whether we recognize the warning or repeat the tragedy. The legacy of Nero is not merely a cautionary tale of one emperor's cruelty. It is the mirror he holds up to humanity, reflecting the fragile line between governance and spectacle, between art and manipulation, between leadership and tyranny. He is the eternal actor whose stage was the empire itself, whose audience was compelled by fear, whose final words, "What an artist dies in me," echo across millennia as both confession and condemnation. And so the story of Nero does not end in the villa where he fell upon his blade. It lives in ruins, in scriptures, in legends, and in the uneasy recognition that the line between ruler and performer, savior and destroyer, remains dangerously thin. When power is wielded as theater, when leaders mistake applause for loyalty and spectacle for stability, the flames of Rome flicker once again, waiting, as they did 2,000 years ago, to consume everything in their path. But perhaps the most haunting question lingers still. Was Nero an anomaly? A singular monster born of empire? Or was he simply the clearest expression of the darkness that forever waits at the heart of power?